Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Music is Not a Genre's PODFAST. Oh, wow, PODFAST twice. There's a new... Okay, I get it. The one on top of the other. It's because of this week's topic. Yep, that's funny, which we'll get to in a second. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@music. It's not a genre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast, and especially with PODFAST, the videos are fun. Watchers, go to nickdimatteo.com/music is not a genre if you don't think the videos are fun and would rather just listen. And everyone, go to patreon.com/music is not a genre to support this podcast, my band Rec, and everything I do. Don't forget, Rec's new singles, Eat Salvation and Eat Salvation LR Remix, are out on streaming now. Find them everywhere. Go to nickdimatteo.com/music or /discography, and you will find the links there. And yes, I have a song coaching service. If you are a songwriter or want to be, and want to go through the whole process as far as you want to take it from beginning to end or wherever you are, go to nickdimatteo.com/songcoaching, and I will help you out. And if always like, subscribe, all that stuff, rate, review. It does make a difference. I dismiss it because it's one of the more distasteful parts of this job, but it's very important. And even people who are, mega successful in the podcast will say that, or at least some of them. So let's get to this week's topic. This is PODFAST 26, by the way. Haven't done one this year, I believe. I think last year. Or no, I did one maybe. I don't remember. But it has been a while. And I do like these PODFASTs, partly because I get to stand up and I've been sitting all day recording the other episodes. This week's topic is Second Time's the Charm, hit songs that were covers. So why this topic? For years, and I've done episodes on cover songs, but not particularly like this, but for years, and I'm talking at least since the early 1980s, I have fallen in love with a hit song or enjoyed one, only to discover sometimes way later that it was a cover. And I've been obsessed with that. And to me, it's always been interesting on two levels. One, how a different version by a different performer can shed new light in a song and often make it work even better. And two, how we then embrace those new versions as coming from the era they were made in, and then associate that song with that era instead of its original era. So I'm going to do a brief prehistory, very brief, then go right into the topic in chronological order by decade and year, and toss in as many as I can find, though of course not all of them, followed by conclusions, featured song, and questions. Sources here are Wikipedia, books.openbookpublishers.com, an essay by P.D. Magnus, The Onion's AV Club, theculturetrip.com, ultimateclassicrock.com, digitalradiocentral.com, digitaldreamdoor.com, hellorayo.co.uk, metafilter.com, and Paste Magazine. Some disclaimers: this won't be a complete history of cover tunes. I'll mention a little history, but I talked about cover tunes in a different episode when I was talking about which was better, the cover or the original. And I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of that. I might repeat a couple of them. I'm going to miss a bunch. Tell me which ones I missed. I'd love to hear from you. The list is way too long. I won't mention every hit cover song because some of them we're well aware of by now, though I will mention some of the ones we're well aware of too, because maybe at the time you or I were not aware that they were covers. I'm not going to mention third, fourth, and fifth covers of songs, even if they were minor hits, because they might not have had the most impact. But if they were huge game-changing versions, then I'm going to mention that, or at least made an impact in some way. I'm not going to do hip-hop redos and repurposings, even though I love those. Like I'll Be Missing You by, Puff Dickety or whatever. Even though many of those songs are incredible in their own right, like Gangsta's Paradise for the Stevie Wonder song. Great. But that's not what this is about, because that's a reimagining, right? There are also cases where a song was recorded but not released until after the cover. So I'm not counting those because then there was no influence there. And I'm also not counting songs not actually recorded first, just written or just demos or whatever, or not released at all. I'm not going to do remixes. As much as I love remixes, it's not the same thing. Also, quick comment here. I go decade by decade, but in the 2010s and 20s, there aren't that many listed, if any. And that's because starting with an influence of 90s hip hop in 2000s, 2010s, 2020s especially, there's a phenomenon of artists not quite covering a tune, using it as material added to, it's like a mashup with their own material. And I love a lot of these, like SZA's kinda cover of Girl from Ipanema, What Isn't. I'm not going to mention those because it's not the same thing, although I will come back to this point briefly towards the end. So let's get to the history. Cover songs have been around since recorded music, probably before then. Not using that term, but you know what I mean. Imagine a famous singer from the 1800s making a song popular, and then another famous singer doing their version and also making it popular. That's kind of the same concept, though not recorded. We can talk about the crooner or vocalist era, which to me was, 20s, 30s, late 20s, 30s into the 60s. And not that crooners didn't continue after that, but that kind of influence sort of petered out by then. And how singers would repeatedly do versions of hit songs in hopes that they too would have a hit. That's very similar, but a little bit different in spirit. That was just pulling from the songbook, the standards, Great American Songbook, and saying, I'm going to do this too. It's very similar, but it wasn't quite what we're talking about here. So I'm going to start in the 1950s and just and mention a few of those along with other decades to show how common it was even then. And then I'm going to stick to songs mostly for which the cover tune was a equal or bigger hit than the original. And the reason I'm starting in the 50s, other than the ones I gave, is because the term cover song was first used in print in 1952. Which probably means it was around long before then in the musical jargon, but cited by then and became used, much more widely by the mid to late 1950s. There are several theories as to why they use the word cover. And the only one I like really is that it's a marketing term in the sense that you're covering your share of the market by redoing an already popular song. And it was coined to describe another version of a single released at the same time as the original. So you're competing in the market, taking your share of the market. You're covering your share. And that this was often, starting in the 50s especially, a white artist covering a black artist's song to make it more appealing and acceptable to a wider audience. And as we know, there are some major cons to that and issues, but there's some pros too, because it eventually would shed light on those black artists, and some of them got the money they deserved, but that's not what this is about. So let's get into the actual chronology of this, starting with the 1950s. In 1954, Rock Around the Clock was released by Bill Haley and the Comets, was not an original. Sunny Day and His Knights, spelled like Knights of the Round Table, released that song earlier in 1954. And what you're going to find, and I love this, is that in the beginning, covers would come out same year, same month, same season, very, very quickly, usually and often while that other song was still on the charts, if it made the charts. And then as years would go on, the distance between the original and the cover would grow and grow and grow quite a bit. Also 1954, also Bill Haley, Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Not an original. Big Joe Turner released his version earlier in 54. In 56, Elvis released Hound Dog, and it's very famously a Leiber and Stoller song, first recorded by Big Mama Thornton, a pioneer, in 1952. In 1956, Elvis also released Blue Suede Shoes, which, of course, Carl Perkins did earlier that year. In 56, Fats Domino released Blueberry Hill. Always thought it was his song. Was not. Sammy Kaye with Tommy Ryan released that song in 1940. Joyce. Joyce is a word now. In 1957, whole lot of shaking going on. Jerry Lee Lewis, not his. Big Maybelle released it in 1955. I'm telling you, on this list, there are several I originally didn't know were covers, but then learned were covers. There are a few that I knew were covers from the beginning, but there are quite a few I had no idea were covers. So, example, I eventually learned pretty long time ago that Hound Dog was a cover, right? I did not know that A Whole Lot of Shakin', or Shake, Rattle, and Roll were covers. So perfect example. In 1957, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, the aforementioned Carl Perkins, but he was doing a song by Rex Griffin released in 1936. And then, of course, George Harrison sang it on a Beatles album in 1964. In 1957, All Shook Up was Elvis again, doing a song by David Hill from the year before called I'm All Shook Up. So changed it a little. Which he also did, and this is not a cover because it was a reimagining, really a redoing, repurposing an Italian song which became There's No Tomorrow, which became It's Now or Never. That was Elvis saying, there's no tomorrow, is too depressing. Let's make it more positive, whatever. Not the same thing, but I wanted to mention it. So note, though, is that in the 50s here, you can see the trend of white artists doing black artist songs, often hitting the charts at exactly the same time, though not always. You could see some of them were older. And some is in good spirit, just loved the song, wanted to do it. And some it was, we're going to take that share of the market because black artists were not being marketed to white artists at the time, to white fans at the time, was really what it was. And that would change, over the next few years. But you could see why that would be called covering your share of the market. And another note, I didn't mention people like, Pat Boone doing Tutti Frutti by Little Richard. There's a lot of that happened. Like very, very, very deliberately white artists, like singing in a very, all I can say is in a white way to appeal supposedly to at least a certain faction of white listeners and homogenizing a song like Tutti Frutti. But there are a lot of that out there. Okay. And I will say a lot of those versions charted higher than the originals. I'm just going to mention it there and leave it at that. Which brings me to the 1960s. Close one to home here. The Twist. Chubby Checker, who is being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year, is a very good friend of my dad's from childhood. They still keep in touch. He was doing it's like a replica of Hank Ballard's 1959 version of The Twist. 1960, a song called Suddenly was released by a guy called Nicky DiMatteo. That's my dad. Petula Clark released it the year before. And I mention this not because any of you would know it, but A, because it's a worthy song. Look up Suddenly, Nicky DiMatteo. You're going to love it. I'm telling you. And B, this is the featured song because my band Rec did a version of this in 2020. And it's a reinvention of the song. Both versions, I think, are really good and worth listening to. And stick around to the end and listen to that one. 1963, of course, the Beatles released Twist and Shout, which I'm pretty sure we all knew was a cover. It was the Isley Brothers' 1962, but that was a cover. The Top Notes first released it in 1961. And I believe Phil Medley was a co-writer of that. 1963, the Kingsmen released Louie Louie, but Richard Berry released it first in 1957. And I mentioned that on the other episode, I believe. 1963 also, Johnny Cash releases Ring of Fire, not his song. Anita Carter in 1962 released it first. I don't think she wrote it either. 1964, the Stones, who did a lot of covers early in their career, did Time Is On My Side. Yes, it is. Irma Thomas first released that song in the same year. That was the first version to have lyrics. But she was covering 1963 original by Kai Winding, who was a trombonist, and it was an instrumental. Quick note, by the way, that the early Beatles, early Stones albums, ton of covers. Not going to go over all those. A lot of bands during the 60s would do covers like that. They too would take old blues songs, old folk songs, old rock and roll songs, old R&B songs, and redo them, such as people redoing Dylan's work, or how the Byrds did Turn, 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 to everything, turn, 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 which was done by Pete Seeger, written by Pete Seeger, but done secondly by him. I think there was another group did it first. And I'm not going to go over all those either, but worth mentioning. 1967, Aretha Franklin released Respect It took me years to learn that it was an Otis Redding song first. And I believe even he said this would be better sung by a woman or something like that. But he released it first. In 1968, Piece of My Heart by Big Brother and the Holding Company. Janis Joplin, not their song. Irma Franklin released it in 1967. Also in 1968, Susie Q by Creedence. Dale Hawkins did that song in 1957. And that's all I'm going to talk about for the 60s. I'm sure there were many, many, many more. This is just got an overview. 1970s, interesting decade. Every decade has its own flavor. The 50s was the, advent of covering and the co-opting decade, you could say. The 60s was kind of the homage decade. And the 70s was, I would almost call it the Sharesies decade in many ways. But, you can never, then again, with the 70s, that kind of works. In 1970, Clapton released After Midnight. J.J. Cale did that first in 1966. And then, of course, Clapton will release another version in the 1980s. And both were hits, late 80s, I believe. Also in 1970, Woodstock by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, one of my favorites of theirs. Never knew it was a Joni Mitchell song from the same year. It was the B-side to Big Yellow Taxi. Love Joni Mitchell, but I gotta say their version of Woodstock just absolutely kills. In 1970, Black Magic Woman by Santana was actually originally a 1968 Fleetwood Mac song. That's the Peter Green incarnation of Fleetwood Mac. It was his song. And I did know that was a cover for quite a while. 1973, Killing Me Softly with his song Roberta Flack, thought she was the original. But Lori Lieberman did it in 1972. And then, of course, the Fugees covered it again in 1996, shortening the title to Killing Me Softly. Gotta be honest, love all of those versions for different reasons. 1974, Grand Funk Railroad releases Some Kind of Wonderful. But that was a song from 1967 by the band Soul Brothers 6. In 1974, you're no good, you're no good, you're no good, baby, you're no Linda Ronstadt. But she was doing a Dee Warwick version from 1963, the original, and that was Dionne Warwick's sister. But it was made more famous in between by Betty Everett. That was in 1963 as well, later in that year, and done several more times in between before Linda Ronstadt got to it. 1976, Blinded by the Light, Manfred Mann's Earth Band, I think their full name is. Of course, that's a 1973 song off of Bruce Springsteen's debut album. In 1977, did not know this, Cocaine by Eric Clapton. It's not his song, is again J.J. Cale. This one, 1977. So the same year. I guess he liked J.J. Cale's work. Hopefully the guy got paid. In 1978, Back in the New York Groove by Ace Frehley. This has been played a ton of times in the last few years since the pandemic. But not his song. Done first by the glam rock band Hello in 1975. In 1979, Doctor, Give Me the News, Bad Case of Loving You by Robert Palmer, which was a big hit. He was a master of covers. An inspiration to me, I think. I don't sound like him, but the way I do covers is the way he did, which is to reimagine it but keep the spirit of the original. That was a Moon Martin song from 1978, the year before. So we get to the 1980s, which I call the pinnacle. It really, to me, was the pinnacle of covers becoming hits because there's so many. So let's get to them. 1980, The Tide is High. Not a Blondie song. It's by the Paragons, a rocksteady band in 1967. 1981, Betty Davis Eyes. This one blew me away. Big Kim Carnes hit, which my wife said Betty Davis did not enjoy. But it was a Jackie DeShannon song from 1974, which sounds more like a kind of music hall version. I like that version, honestly, better. 1981, Oh Mickey, You're So Fine, Tony Basil covered English group Racey, R-A-C-E-Y, song Kitty, so just changed the gender, changed the name, from 1976. So Mickey, Tony, Racey, Kitty, it's a lot of words ending in E, but Mickey was not an original. 1981, I've done everything for you, you've done nothing for me, Rick Springfield. But that was a Sammy Hagar song from 1978, never knew that. I knew this one, 1981, I Love Rock and Roll. It was not a Joan Jett and the Blackhearts song. It was the Arrows song from 1975. 1981, Tainted Love. It took me a while to learn this was a cover. Soft Cell doing Gloria Jones, who had versions in both 65 and 76, both of which did well. But I don't think as well as Soft Cell. 1982, Do You Believe in Love as Huey Lewis and the News, but that was a Supercharged song from 1979. 1982, I Want Candy, Bow Wow Wow, doing the Strange Love song from 1965. 1982, Calling Gloria, Laura Branigan, was actually Umberto Tozzi, Italian guy, in 79, but then English lyrics, Jonathan King, also 1979, and then she took it, and I guess actually, I don't think she needed to change the gender. 1983, Red, Red Wine. I didn't know this was a cover right away, and then learned that UB40 was doing a Neil Diamond song from 1967. UB40 is another band that did well with covers, because I think they did I Can't Help Falling in Love with You, just like Corey Hart did and whatever. But they did fairly well reinterpreting songs. Also in 1983, Come On, Feel the Noise, Quiet Riot. That was a Slade song from 1973. It's actually amazing how non-rocking the Slade version is. In 1983, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, Cyndi Lauper, was written and recorded by Robert Hazard in 1979. In 1984, Some Guys Have All the Luck. It was Rod Stewart doing a Robert Palmer song from 1982, who was doing the Persuaders song from 1973. So that's a double cover, and I believe they were all hits, and I think they were all increasing hits. 1984, Get It On, Power Station, again, Robert Palmer. It was a T-Rex song from 1971, again, not very hard rocking. 1985, Manic Monday, very famously, the Bangles, doing a song by Prince, but was originally released the year before by Apollonia 6. 1986, Venus, Bananarama. I think we all knew this was a cover. Shocking Blue, 1969, a Swedish band. Also in 1986, I Didn't Mean to Turn You On, again, Robert Palmer, doing an excellent cover of a Shirelle song from 1984, and I loved both of those versions. Are excellent. Excellent. 1987, Hazy Shade of Winter by the Bangles. We knew this was a cover, but I'm sorry, I love Simon and Garfunkel. This was from 1966. Bangles beat them. Sorry. 1987, How Do I Get You Alone is Heart, but that was not their song. I-10 did it in 1983. 1987, Got My Mind Set on You was, of course, George Harrison's big hit. He was doing James Ray, 1962 song. In 1987, also, I Think We're Alone Now, Tiffany. Of course, we knew that was a hit, doing Tommy James and the Shondells from 1967. Tiffany and so many others took 60s and 50s songs to the top of the charts in the 1980s. Again, this was kind of the decade for cover hits, but I'm not going to mention them all. And in fact, I think that's good for that decade. Tell me what I missed. Let's get to the 1990s. I'm free to do what I want any old time. Never knew. Soup Dragons. That was a Stones song from 1965. It took me years and years to realize it. And honestly, the Soup Dragons version is better. 1990. Black Crowes doing Otis Redding's 1968 song. Both good for different reasons. 1990, of course, famous Sinead O'Connor, Nothing Compares to You, was Prince, but he didn't record it till afterwards and released it. It was actually first recorded by The Family, one of his side bands, in 1985. Also 1990, one of my favorites, They Might Be Giants, doing Istanbul, not Constantinople, it's Istanbul, doing the Four Lads 1953 novelty song, but it was covered a ton in between. But that was a big hit. I think their biggest hit. 1991, I Will Always Love You, Whitney doing Dolly from 1974. 1991, great discovery for me years later, Rod Stewart's Downtown Train, who did a lot of covers over the years, some good, some not so good. It was a 1985 Tom Waits song, and Tom Waits' version is so sublime. I don't dislike Rod Stewart's version, but it's more, bombastic. 1982, guess what? Billy Ray Cyrus, Achy Breaky Heart, not his song. The Marcy Brothers did it the year before, wrote it and did it, and they called it Don't Tell My Heart. In 1993, one of my favorite bands, the Lemonheads, Into Your Arms, was a big hit for them, but it was actually done in 89 by Love Positions. This guy, Nick Dalton, who was a member of both bands. So that's how that is. So that was a little cheating there, but I had to say it because I actually like the Love Positions version. I heard it for the first time yesterday. 1993, what a man, En Vogue and Salt and Pepper teaming up, doing the Linda Lindell song from 1968, also released in 1970 by Laura Lee. In 1990, and that was really the beginning of when, not the beginning, because Mr. Big Stuff from, I think, the 80s was a redo, was hip-hop. So there were strains of hip-hop already repurposing songs, not just as samples, but as like redoing the song as a cover and then adding their stuff to it, which, as I said, would blow up, in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and take over really by the 2010s. In 1993, Don't Turn Around, not an Ace of Base song. Probably their biggest hit after a string of covers. It was probably the biggest version hit of Don't Turn Around after a string of covers of that song by a lot of artists. I think even Neil Diamond. Tina Turner, though, originated it in 1986. The Power of Love, Celine Dion, in 94, was actually a Jennifer Rush song in 84 and recorded by several others in between. Maybe that was the one, Neil Diamond. I don't know. He's somewhere. In 1994, I swear by the moon and the stars, All for One is doing a John Michael Montgomery song from the year before, which is early proof to me that country and R&B have been compatible for a long time. Of course, this one, 1994's Landslide by the Smashing Pumpkins. I will confess at the time I thought it was their song. Didn't know it was a cover for a while. But it's a 1975 Fleetwood Mac song, which of course everybody knows now, and I knew a couple of years later. 1997, I'm a Little Torn and Stuff by Natalie Imbruglia. Was not her song. It was an Edna Swap song from 1995, though there's also a 93 Danish version, and it was written in 91. In 1997, also, To Make You Feel My Love was written by Dylan, and both he and Billy Joel released it in 97, and I want to say Billy Joel's came out first by a few months, and then Garth Brooks released it in 98, and the thing is, all of them were popular. All of them were hits, I believe. All right, so big note, by the 90s and into the 2000s and beyond, here we go with my same note. The trend of covering leaned more towards songs that were already big hits. So there were fewer and fewer discoveries. So that was an interesting shift to where for a while, first it was, here's a song that not enough people know. I'm going to almost steal it and make my own version and make it popular. That's like 50s. The 60s were, I want people to know this song because I love it. The 70s were, hey, you're a fellow artist and you like this, I'm going to do this too. And, I don't know how the deals went, but that's what it seemed like to me. The 80s were, find any song, preferably one that was slightly obscure, but even some more famous ones, and turn it into a big old 80s hit. The 90s had some of that, but it was started trickling out to the point where, like Landslide, although I didn't know it at the time, it was about 50-50 of bands choosing either well-known songs or obscure songs. By the 2000s, to me, it was almost all well-known songs. And there are hundreds of those, and some of them were big hits, but I'm avoiding a lot of them, partly because of time and partly because it's not that interesting. I could hardly find any standouts, although a lot of them I enjoyed. I just didn't feel like they stood out. That said, the 2000s. 2001, Smooth Criminal is a very famous Alien Ant Farm cover of the 1988 Michael Jackson song. Also 2001, a very famous cover of I'm a Believer by Smash Mouth, Monkees 1967. 2001 also is a song I didn't hear till I heard it in the movie Donnie Darko, but then it became like more of a hit later on, and that is Tears for Fears' Mad World, covered by Gary Jules. I didn't know it was a cover. And I eventually listened to Tears for Fears' entire catalog and learned it was a cover later on. But the 82 version is great. I think the 2001 version is better, and a comment on that in a second. In 2002, of course, the very famous Rick Rubin albums with Johnny Cash, and one of the great songs on that was Hurt, which was Nine Inch Nails' 1994 song. Again, this is more reinventing a song that was already popular. That's why you see the trend shifting. And here's the note I want to say, and that is, starting more or less in the 2000s and then blowing up over the next 2 decades, artists would take an upbeat hit song like Mad World or Hurt, upbeat meaning driving, whatever, and redo it as a contemplative ballad, either acoustic or electronic or some combination. Some of these are great, like the couple I just mentioned, but eventually this became such a freaking cliche. And I think my wife pointed out to me a version of From Greece, You're the One That I Want, that makes it sound like, I don't know, everybody in the song is freaking dying or something, but it just went into cliche and overbearing. In 2002, the Fountains of Wayne did Better Things, which is a cover of the 1981 Kinks song, underrated masterpiece, both of them. Also, 2002, also, Norah Jones, Don't Know Why, not her song. Jesse Harris and the Ferdinandos did it in 1999. In 2003, this one, I don't remember if I knew it was a cover, but I didn't understand why I knew this song so well, even though I was not a big No Doubt fan, but It's My Life. Talk Talk did it first in 1984, and I remember when I heard it, I was like, oh, I do remember that one. In 2003, the Ataris did Boys of Summer, Don Henley, 1984. Just heard that in a store somewhere. Cool version. In 2006, Gnarls Barkley doing The Femmes' Gone, Daddy Gone from 1983. Great version. Love The Femmes, of course. And in 2007, Valerie from Amy Winehouse was actually a Zooton song from the year before. Not much left here. Hang with me, people, because in the 2010s, I'm only going to mention one, and that's because it's a freaking standout crossover genre thing. In 2016, Charles Bradley did the song Changes, which is a Black Sabbath song from 1972. Go listen to it. And in the 2020s, I'm not going to mention anything because of the aforementioned disclaimer that artists are, to me, being in some ways more creative by mashing up an old song with their lyrics and shifting it and changing it, again, inspired by what was happening in hip-hop in the late 80s into the 90s, and in particular in the 90s, you know, and then throughout the 2000s, but really taking hold as the trend for covering songs in an interesting way to this day. Some conclusions. I have it blank here, and why? Really the only conclusion, as I want to say, is that the covers I like are the ones that do something different with the song, but maintain the spirit of the original. I've said it a million times, and many of these have done that. Sometimes I like both. Sometimes I like the original better. Sometimes I like the new one better, like with the Bangles' Hazy Shade of Winter. But that, as long as the artist is getting paid, or the writer is getting paid, or somebody's getting paid for the original, I am super okay with covers. I haven't done a ton of them. Speaking of featured song, I've done quite a few, but not a lot compared to other artists. I've done them live for pay and for fun, but I haven't recorded that many. Although if you look up my album, It Wasn't Me, nickdamadio.com/discography, look for It Wasn't Me. That's where all my covers are on that one single album so far. Anyway, but my pick for the featured song is what I mentioned before, and that is Petula Clark's song from 1959, but a Nicky DiMatteo song from 1960 called Suddenly. And I chose it because it's my favorite song of his that he didn't write. And it was also his most successful hit, my dad's most successful hit, charting in the top 100 in 1960. So my recording takes his lovely post-1950s rock and roll, pre-1960s rock, flowing pop ballad with a bit of a Latin beat, which was a popular thing then, and backup singers, and updates it into a power pop / emo pop song, like Lit or, I don't know, Blink-182, I guess. And it features my dad on backup vocals, and he actually starts the song. His voice starts the song. There's not much more to say other than both versions work really well and are worth listening to. So please stick around for my version. Click the link and you can hear everything. There's always questions for you. What hit songs that you were aware of did you already know were covers? And which ones did you not know were covers, whether I mentioned them or not? In fact, which ones did I miss? Would you like, hey, by the way, this was a cover, you didn't know that. I want to know because I know I missed a lot, and I always want to know because my objectives are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging with me for this 26th PODFAST, and I will talk to you next week.
Spoken quietly, we walked alone and talked alone till dawn had broken. Found the words to tell you I love you, love you, love you, love you. Know that when love came to me, it came so suddenly. Suddenly I fell in love, so deep in love I can't recover. Suddenly you smiled at me, it had to be, there is no other. Can't explain the reason why I love you, love you, love you, love you. Know that when love came to me, it came so suddenly.